Welcome to An Echo of the Past. My name is Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, though the world came to know me by another name, Madame de Pompadour. I was the woman who walked the halls of Versailles with a smile that could change a king's mind. And yet, behind all the gold and glitter, I was still human, with dreams, desires, and the courage to be different. If you enjoy stories of those who still whisper through time, you can support this channel by liking, sharing, or subscribing. Every gesture helps our voices remain heard. And now, let me tell you how a nameless girl became a woman who ruled France, without armies, only through words and charm. I was born on December 29, 1721, in Paris. My name was Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, the daughter of a middle-class family with more determination than wealth. My father, François Poisson, was a merchant, a man who could make money, but also lose favor with those who held power. When he became entangled in a financial scandal, he fled France to avoid imprisonment. I remained with my mother, Louise Madeleine Lamotte, a proud and strong woman, determined that her daughter would not live the life of an ordinary Parisian girl. Soon after my father's departure, she remarried François Le Normand d'Étiolles, a respected and educated man. Thanks to him, we moved to a better neighborhood, and for the first time, I saw a world where lives were shaped by whispers behind silk curtains. My mother believed that fate could be mastered, if you dared to face it. One day, she took me to a fortune teller. The old woman gazed at me for a long moment, stroked my hair, and said, "One day, you will be the king's mistress." I was barely 9 years old. From that day, my mother changed. She began to prepare me for a life most girls could only dream of. She taught me to dance, to play music, to draw, to converse, to carry myself with grace and move as if the world were watching. She often said, "Antoinette, a woman who knows how to speak, to listen, and to smile can win a crown, even if she never wears it." When I was 19, I married Charles Guillaume Le Normand d'Étiolles, a distant relative of my stepfather. It was not love, but an alliance that opened the doors to the elegant world of society. At our home in Étiolles, I began to host evenings filled with music, conversation, and laughter. Poets, philosophers, and artists visited us. Among them Voltaire, whose words taught me that ideas can be mightier than any sword. At the time, I did not yet realize that those small gatherings over tea and candlelight were merely a prelude. That somewhere beyond the forests of Versailles, my destiny was already walking toward me, dressed in royal blue velvet. My house in Étiolles became known throughout Paris. Everyone who mattered wished to come: philosophers, poets, musicians, and politicians. Each evening we lit candles, poured wine, and let thoughts flow more freely than they ever could at court. Voltaire often said to me, "Madame d'Étiolles, if the king possessed your intellect, France would be a happier place." I would laugh, yet deep inside I knew. Fate was already moving, slowly, like the ticking clock in my salon that marked the rhythm of my youth. At that time, I only knew of the king from stories. Louis XV, the beloved king, who was said to feel utterly alone in the midst of his own court. A ruler of one of the world's greatest kingdoms, yet a man whose heart drowned in boredom, melancholy, and the heavy crown of solitude. And then, as fate often arranges, our paths crossed. It was the year 1745, at a grand ball celebrating the king's return from the war in Flanders. I, a woman of middle-class birth, found myself in a world that belonged to nobility. The court was alive, the whisper of silk, the shimmer of crystal, the murmur of intrigue. And there, amid that golden light, stood Louis XV, in a blue coat embroidered with gold, his eyes not of a king, but of a man. When our eyes met, it felt as if the world had stopped for a single heartbeat. I don't know what drew him. Perhaps the courage to look directly into his gaze, without fear, as one should never look at a king. And then, he smiled. I followed the rhythm of the music, yet all I could think of was that look, the one that seemed to say, "Stay in my memory." A few days later, an invitation arrived. A royal hunt in the forest of Senart, near Versailles. I rode in an open carriage, wearing a gown of pale blue silk that shimmered in the morning sun. Along the way, I prayed, not to God, but to destiny, the same destiny that had once promised I would meet a king. When I saw him, astride a white horse, I thought I was looking upon a painting from a forgotten dream. He stopped before me. "Madame de Pompadour?" he asked with a smile. "Yes, Your Majesty," I replied. It was a quiet moment. Simple, and yet it changed everything. From that day on, he sent letters, messages written by the same hand that signed laws and decrees. But there was no power in those letters, only tenderness. Weeks later, he sent me a gift, the keys to a small residence within Versailles, and with them a new title, Marquise de Pompadour. He chose the name himself. "It is a name you deserve," he said. "It sounds like music." When I entered the world of the court, my husband, Charles-Guillaume Lenormand d'Étiolles, remained in Paris. He was a decent man, reasonable, calm, but ordinary. When he heard that the king had taken an interest in his wife, he reportedly turned pale and said, "The king is too great a rival." Unlike other men, he did not rage against fate. He wrote no letters, spoke no accusations. Perhaps he understood that what was happening was greater than either of us. The law and courtly etiquette required that a woman presented to the king as his official favorite must be free. So I left my marital home. Divorce was rare, a scandal that could destroy a woman. But I had the king on my side. He arranged a legal separation, and I became Madame de Pompadour, living apart. They said Charles withdrew from Paris and never spoke ill of me or the king. Only once, to a friend, he is said to have remarked, "If I were not her husband, I would be her admirer." Perhaps he never truly loved me, and perhaps that is why he could let me go without bitterness. Still, I carried a shadow of that past within me. I remembered him as a piece of a life that had to be sacrificed so another could begin. Versailles opened its gates for me, but beyond them I left behind everything that had once been mine. Home, certainty, privacy. And yet, I did not regret it. When I first passed through the golden gates of Versailles, my heart beat faster than ever before. I felt as though I were entering a gilded cage, beautiful, dazzling, but still a cage. The ladies of the court greeted me with smiles that stung like thorns. The men bowed, their eyes measuring how long I would last. They whispered, "A charming commoner. She'll fade within months." But I had not come to entertain. I had come to endure. And the king sensed that. In his presence, I was not an ornament. I was the calm he had long been denied. We saw each other every day. We spoke of art, of nature, of matters the king had never discussed with anyone. Sometimes we sat in silence, listening to the ticking of the clock. Once he said, "When I speak with you, I forget that I am the king." That was when I understood. My destiny was no accident. Every moment, from the fortune-teller's prophecy to that first glance beneath candlelight, had led me here. To Versailles. A place where dreams come true, but at a price few could ever bear. The first time I stepped into Versailles, I felt as though I were touching a dream. The hall of mirrors shimmered like the sky itself, walls gilded with gold reflected in marble, and the air was heavy with the scent of roses, perfume, and envy. The court was a perfect theater. Every gesture had meaning, every smile was a role that had to be performed. And I, a woman born to a middle-class family, had stepped onto a stage where the play was power, and no one ever wins forever. The king, Louis XV, shielded me with his favor. He gave me apartments directly above his own, so he could summon me whenever he wished. Yet that very closeness soon showed me how lonely even the most powerful man in the world could be. We spent long evenings together. Sometimes we read the poems of Voltaire. Other nights we played cards or listened to music. The king was not the cold monarch history often paints. He was a man seeking escape from the weight of his crown and from the cruelty of his court. In his eyes I saw weariness and a longing for peace no one else could give him. And I became that peace. But while he leaned upon my presence, the court began to turn against me. Ladies of noble birth saw me as an intruder. They whispered my name, loudly enough for every gallery to hear. "A commoner," they said, "the king's passing fancy." So I learned to smile even when I wanted to remain silent. Each day I put on a new smile, as carefully as the silk gowns my seamstresses prepared for me each morning. Soon I realized that true power at court did not come from blood, but from knowledge and reason. I began to read everything I could find: philosophy, science, poetry. The king found in me not only beauty, but a mind that dared to speak of things his ministers would never tell him truthfully. We debated art, reform, and how France might be guided toward greater wisdom. People liked to believe I was merely an ornament of the throne, but I was present at every great decision, though always one step behind, in the shadows. The years passed, and with them, my place beside King Louis XV began to change. Our passion had quieted, yet something far stronger remained. I became his shadow, the listener of his fears, his counsel, his silence. Many wondered why the king still kept me close, when the fire between us had long turned to embers. But Louis often said, "A man may have many lovers, but only one true friend." And I was that friend. In those years, I became not only the woman by his side, but a silent part of his rule, never officially, yet always present. I spoke with ministers, read their reports, and offered the king a perspective his courtiers lacked: reason, empathy, and a sense of beauty. The king trusted me deeply. At times I arranged audiences with foreign envoys, and I saw their surprise when a woman, and not of noble birth, spoke with such confidence about the affairs of France. Courtiers accused me of ruling the kingdom. Perhaps they were not entirely wrong. But I ruled not through orders. I ruled through persuasion. The king often came to me when he was weary of politics, of people, of the crown itself. We would sit by the fire, listening to music, speaking of things that burdened him. "Antoinette," he once said, "why will the people never understand that even a king is only a man?" And I answered, "Because, Your Majesty, people do not see the man beneath the crown. They see only the crown itself." My influence reached beyond the palace walls. I supported artists, architects, and philosophers, among them Voltaire, whom I helped return from exile. I aided the philosopher Diderot in publishing his Encyclopédie, a book meant to open minds, yet condemned by the church. The king knew, but he let me be. Perhaps he understood that culture was the gentlest way to guide France toward wisdom. Within the palace, I had studios built for painters and sculptors who filled the halls with portraits, statues, and frescoes. The Rococo style I loved spread across Europe, light, feminine, and full of life. But power always demands its price. Every success brought new enemies. The Queen tolerated me, but never forgave me. Courtiers treated me as a foreign body in their world. They mocked my origins, watched my every step, waited for me to fall. But I knew I had to endure. Those who let whispers frighten them, I told myself, will never again hear applause. So I smiled, wore gowns in every shade of rose, and walked across marble floors that once rejected me, but had, in time, become mine. Versailles despised me. France admired me. And I loved them both, the king and the country for which I lived. Time is a strange ally. When you are young, it moves too slowly. When you grow old, it runs too fast. My days at court had changed. I was no longer the young woman who drew every gaze. I had become a quieter voice in the background, the counsel the king sought when he no longer knew where to turn. Our conversations grew calmer. We spoke of the past, of art, of the things that remain when all else fades. King Louis XV called me my dear friend. He no longer loved me as a woman, but he cared for me as for a soul he knew better than his own. And I was changing. An illness I had not yet named began to weaken me. The doctors said it was only fatigue, that I needed rest. But I knew better. It was the sickness that steals one's breath. Tuberculosis. Day by day I felt my world grow smaller, as even the simplest things demanded a strength I no longer possessed. And still,
I continued to visit the salons, to smile, to wear silk gowns that hid what was happening within. One morning, April 15th, 1764, Versailles awoke in silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows as the king came to me. He sat beside my bed, took my hand, and said,
Antoinette, you have always been braver than I. I smiled. Your Majesty, I whispered, anyone can rule when the day is bright, but few remain calm when night arrives. The king bowed and kissed my hand, and then he left, because he did not want me to see him weep. I died only a few hours later, in my chamber, surrounded by the flowers I had always loved. When my funeral carriage passed through the courtyard of Versailles, the king watched from his window. And when one courtier remarked, "Sire, the rain is ill fortune for her," the king replied, "No, monsieur. The rain is the sky in mourning." Thus my story ended. But not everything that ends disappears. Some things remain, in stone, in music, in color, and in the memory of those who still wish to listen.
Today, I am only a name in books, a portrait in a museum, a face upon an old canvas. But once, I was a voice that whispered in the ear of a king, and a hand that signed the dreams of artists. I helped France rediscover beauty in times when the world wished only for war. I brought to court culture, grace, and reason. I left behind architecture, music, poetry, and the courage to be different. People say I was only the king's mistress, but I know I was more. I was a woman born without a crown, and yet I touched the royal sky. If my story moved you, don't forget to leave a comment, to like, share, or subscribe to An Echo of the Past channel. Every word, every listen, helps our voices from history remain alive in the silence. The past whispers, the future listens.